Hi guys. So I just looked with another friend. We have 100 pages left to read before the end of the day tomorrow. So I'm going to try to get through as many as I can right now, and then we'll have to break up the other whatever's left between the two sessions tomorrow. I know that we can do this, and I think that the last one might have been a little bit less exciting, but hopefully from here on out it gets a little more exciting. All right, chapter 41, I Promise. They were in a car. Flora's father's hands were on the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2. Flora was sitting up front and Ulysses' head was out the window. They were heading back to Flora's mother's house in spite of Flora's protestations. We have to go back, said her father. We have to return at the regular Saturday afternoon time. We have to act normal, natural, unconcerned. Flora wanted to object, but she could read the writing on the wall. Or rather, she could read the words that hovered above her and her father and the squirrel. Destiny could no longer be forestalled. The arch nemesis must be faced. Holy Bagumba, said her father. His right ear was wrapped in a huge amount of gauze. His head looked lopsided, because remember the cat attacked him. Wholly unanticipated occurrences. The squirrel vanquished a cat. He shook his head. He smiled. And now it's time for another battle, said Flora. Everything will be fine, said her father. So you say, said Flora. It started to rain. Ulysses pulled his head back inside the car. He looked up at Flora, and the sight of his little whiskered face calmed her somehow. She smiled at him, and the squirrel sighed happily and curled up in her lap. When I was a girl in Blormesian, Dr. Measham had said to Flora when they were all leaving apartment 267, we wondered always if we would see each other again. Each day was uncertain, so to say goodbye to someone was uncertain too. Would you see them again? Who could say? Blormesian was a place of dark secrets, unmarked graves, terrible curses. Trolls were everywhere. So we say goodbye to each other the best way we could. We say, I promise to always turn back toward you. I say those words to you now, Florabelle. I promise to always turn back toward you. And now you must say them to me. I promise to always turn back towards you, Flora had said. She whispered the words again now to the squirrel. I promise to always turn back towards you. She put a finger on Ulysses' chest. His tiny heart was beating out a message that felt like, I promise, I promise, I promise. Hearts were strange things. Pop, said Flora. Yes, said her father. Can I feel your heart? My heart? Said her father. Okay, sure. And then, for the first time ever, George Buckman took both hands off the steering wheel while the car was in motion. He opened his arms wide. Flora gently moved Ulysses out of her lap and onto the seat beside her, and then she reached up and across and put her hand on the left side of her father's chest, and she felt it, her father's heart, beating there inside of him. It felt very certain, very strong, and very large, just like Dr. Measham had said, capacious. Thank you, she told him. Sure, he said, you bet. He put his hands back on the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2, and the three of them, Flora, her father, and the squirrel, traveled the rest of the way home in a strange and peaceful silence. The only noise was from the windshield wipers. They hummed back and forth, singing a sweet, out-of-tune song. The squirrel slept, and Florabelle Buckman was happy. Chapter 42. Foreboding. Her father pulled the car into the driveway and cut the engine. The windshield wipers let out a surprised squeak and then froze in mid-wave. The rain slowed to a trickle. The sun came out from behind the cloud and then disappeared again, and the smell of ketchup melded with butterscotch rose in a gentle persistence from the seats of the car. Here we are, said her father. Yep, said Flora. Here we are. 412 Belgrand Avenue. It was the house that Flora had lived in for her whole life, but something was different about it. Something had changed. What was it? Ulysses crawled up onto her shoulder. She put her hand on him. The house looked sneaky somehow, almost as if it were up to no good. The house looked sneaky somehow, almost as if it were up to no good. Foreboding. It was the word that popped into Flora's head. The house seemed full of foreboding. Do inanimate objects, couches, chairs, spatulas, etc., absorb the energy of criminals, the wrongdoers among whom they live? The criminal element had queried it in a recent issue. It is, of course, entirely unscientific to assume such a thing, but still, we are forced to admit that in this woeful world there exist objects with an almost palpable energy of menace. Spatulas that seemed cursed, couches that contained literal and metaphorical stains of the past, houses that seemed to perpetually groan and moan from the sins contained in their environments. Can we see this? No. Do we understand this? We do not. Do we know that criminals exist? We do. We are also terribly and uncomfortably certain that the criminal element will be forever among us. And the arch-nemesis, thought Flora, the arch-nemesis will be forever among us too. Ulysses' arch-nemesis is in that house right now. Do you remember the darkness of 10,000 hands, Flora said to her father. Yep, said her father. He wields 10,000 hands of anger, greed, and revenge. He is the sworn enemy of Incandesto. He's Incandesto's arch-nemesis, said Flora. Right, said her father. I tell you what. The darkness of 10,000 hands better stay away from our squirrel. He honked the horn. Home the warrior, he shouted. Home the cat-conquering superhero squirrel. Ulysses puffed out his chest. Let's go, Flora said. We have to do it. We have to face the arch-nemesis. Right, said her father. Bravely forward. And he honked the horn again. Chapter 43. They walked into the house, with the little shepherdess was waiting for them. She was standing where she always stood, the lamp at her feet, the tiny globe above her head, and a look on her face that said, I know something you don't know. Flora's father took off his hat and bowed to the lamp. George Buckman, he said, how do you do? Hello? Flora shouted into the silence of the house. From the kitchen came a sound of laughter. Mom? Said Flora. No one answered. Flora's sense of foreboding deepened, expanded, and then her mother spoke. She said, That's absolutely right, William. William? William? There was only one William that Flora knew. What would he be doing in the kitchen with a known arch-nemesis? And then came a familiar rattle of the typewriter keys being struck, the thwack of the cartridge return being hit. Ulysses' grip on her shoulder tightened. He let out a small chirrup of excitement. Her mother laughed again. The laughter was followed by the truly terrifying words, Thank you so much, William. Shh, said Flora to her father, who was standing listening, his hat in his hands and a goofy smile on his face. There was a small brown drop of blood on his ear bandage. It looked oddly festive. You stay here, Flora said to him. Ulysses and I will go check this out. Right, said her father. You bet. I'll stay here. He put his hat on his head. He nodded. Flora's superhero on her shoulder walked quietly, stealthily through the living room and into the dining room and stood before the closed kitchen door. She held herself very still. She made herself into a giant ear. She was getting extremely good at making herself into a giant ear. Flora listened, and she could feel Ulysses, his body tensed and expectant, listening too. Her mother spoke. She said, Yes, it will go like this. Frederico, I have dreamed of you for eons. No, said another voice, a high, thin, and extremely annoying voice. I've dreamed of you for all of eternity. Ooh, said Flora's mother, for all eternity. That's more. That's good. More poetic. Ulysses shifted his position on Flora's shoulder. He nodded. Yes, exactly. And William Spicer, more poetic. Eon sounded too geological. There's nothing romantic about geology, I assure you. Okay, said Flora's mother. Right, what's next, William? Actually, said William Spicer, if you don't mind, I would prefer to be called William Spicer. Of course, said Flora's mother. I'm sorry. What's next, William Spicer? Let me see, said William Spicer. I suppose Frederico could say, and I have dreamed of you, Angeliquin, my darling. I must tell you that they were dreams so vivid and beautiful that I am loath to wake to reality. Ooh, that's good. Hold on a sec. The typewriter keys came to clacking life. The cartridge return dinged. Do you think that's good? Flora whispered to Ulysses. Do you think that's good writing? Ulysses shook his head, his whiskers brushed against her cheek. I don't think so either, she said. Actually, she thought it was terrible. It was sickly sweet nonsense. There was a word for that. It was treacle. That was it. Having to locate the word, Flora felt a sudden need to say the word out loud. So she did. She pushed open the door and stepped forward. Treacle, she shouted. Flora, said her mother. Treacle, said William Spicer. Yes, said Flora. She was pleased with one simple word. She had answered two very important questions. Yes, she was Flora, and yes, it was Treacle. Chapter 44, Her Treacherous Heart. William Spicer was wearing his dark glasses. There was a Piltzer pop in his mouth. She was smiling. He looked exactly like a villain. That's what Flora's brain thought. But her heart, her tenacious heart, rose up joyfully inside of her at the sight of him. Flora's heart was actually glad to see William Spicer. There was so much she wanted to talk to him about. Pascal Wager, Dr. Measham, the other Dr. Measham, the giant squids, the giant donut, and who was dunking them, and if he had ever heard of a place called Burmesian, if he had ever sat on a horsehair sofa. But William Spicer was sitting beside Ulysses' arch-nemesis, smiling. Obviously, he could not be trusted. Flora Bell, said William Spicer. It's me, said Flora. I'm surprised you don't smell me, William Spicer, since you can smell everything. I never claimed to be able to smell everything. However, it is true that right now I am smelling squirrel, and there is another odor. It is something sweet, some scent redolent of school lunchrooms on rainy Thursdays. What is it? Jelly? Yes, grape jelly. I smell squirrel and grape jelly. Squirrel, said Flora's mother. She turned away from the typewriter. She looked at Flora. Squirrel, she said. What in the world are you doing back here with that squirrel? I told your father. This malfeasance must be stopped, said Flora. Her mother, hand still poised on the keys of her typewriter, staring at Flora with her mouth open. William Spicer for once was silent. On Flora's shoulder the squirrel trembled. Flora slowly raised her left arm. She pointed to her mother. She said, What did you tell my father to do to the squirrel? Her mother cleared her throat. I told your father. But the sentence remained unfinished, the truth unuttered, because the kitchen door suddenly swung open to reveal Flora's father. George Buckman, he said to the room at large. How do you do? He walked into the kitchen he stood beside Flora. George Buckman, he said to the room at large. How do you do? He walked into the kitchen. He stood beside Flora. George, what in the world, said Flora's mother. You look like you've been in a battle. I am fine, just fine. I was saved by the squirrel. What? Said Flora's mother. I was attacked by Mr. Claus. He landed on my head, and... That is fascinating, said William Spicer, but may I interrupt for a moment? Absolutely. Who is Mr. Claus? Mr. Claus is a landlord and also a cat, a large cat. Usually he attacks ankles. This time it was my head. It was my head. It was a very surprising attack. I wasn't prepared. And, said William Spicer, oh yes, and Mr. Claus bit my ear, and there was a lot of pain, and the squirrel rescued me. Have you lost your minds? Said Flora's mother. I don't think so, said Flora's father. He smiled hopefully. Can't you handle the smallest task? I asked you to take care of the squirrel situation. Flora felt a wave of anger roll through her. Quit speaking euphemistically, she said. Quit calling it the squirrel situation. You asked him to kill. You asked him to murder my squirrel. Ulysses let out a chirp of agreement, and then the kitchen became as silent as a tomb. And that is all for right now.